Thank you all so much for being here today. It's a beautiful Saturday here in Minnesota, so really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us to learn how to perform Bumblebee Atlas surveys and volunteer with the project. The Atlas programs in Iowa and Minnesota are Xerces affiliated programs. Xerces is a science-based nonprofit organization. We're focused on invertebrate conservation. We're a member-supported organization. I know that there are a lot of members today in the audience, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge you. We couldn't do this work without you, so thank you so much for your support. Just as a reminder, this training is part 2 of a training series. During part 1, we covered bumblebee ecology and conservation, giving you guys the background information that you need to understand bumblebees and why we're doing this project. So if you haven't viewed that video yet, please do so before the start of the field season if you're a new volunteer. It's posted online. It's on our YouTube channel as well as on the Bumblebee Atlas website. Just to give you guys an overview about what we'll be talking about today, we're going to give you a brief overview of the project itself. What is the Atlas? How did we design this project to survey for bumblebees? After that, we'll cover how you can sign up and how you go ahead and conduct your own survey independently. And after that, we'll talk about how you can submit your data. At the end, we'll talk about how you can identify bumblebees and then how to take really good photos of them so that we can well document the bumblebees that we're seeing at various locations. All right, so let's start off with the project overview. The Bumblebee Atlas is a participatory science project that's focused on tracking and monitoring bumblebees. This is a collaborative effort. We are now in 20 different states. In Minnesota and Iowa, we work with partners like the Minnesota DNR, the Iowa DNR, and our partners at Iowa State and University of Minnesota to make this work happen. It is truly a collaborative effort. This project is focused on bumblebees. There are lots of different reasons to target this group. The first one being that there are many species of bumblebees that are imperiled. About a quarter of the species in the United States are considered to be endangered or threatened. And so we care a lot about learning more about these animals so that we can better conserve them. They're also really important for our environment. They are amazing pollinators. They are generalists, so they forage on lots of different types of flowers and lots of different types of habitat. And those plants rely on bumblebees to some extent in order to reproduce. They also have a really unique ecological niche. They are pretty tolerant to cold. They can forage when it's a little bit cool, when it's a little bit rainy outside. And so they're really important pollinators for flowering plants that bloom in the early spring because they can provide pollination services at that unique time. They're also incredibly charismatic animals. They are kind of like the teddy bears of the pollinator world. They're super big, they're super fluffy, and people love them, which makes them a great target for a participatory science program like the Atlas. And bumblebees have been charismatic for a really long time. We've actually have pretty good historical data for bumblebees compared to some other species of bees. And for that reason, we can actually assess their status, which is really cool. As a participatory science project, both the Minnesota and Iowa Bumblebee Atlas programs rely on the effort and time of participants, volunteers, like you who make this work happen. The people who participate in the Atlas conduct formal surveys and help us establish baseline data sets for bumblebees. And using that data, we can do things like monitor population changes, monitor the distribution of species, and fill in knowledge gaps related to habitat associations. We can use that information to form evidence-based recommendations for folks doing on-the-ground restoration work. The data that you collect doesn't just help us understand what's going on in your state, it also helps us understand what's going on with these animals across the region. Participants in the Midwest have collected over 40,000 observations of bumblebees since we've started these programs, and that data is truly an amazing collection of observations. By participating in the Atlas, you're sharing this data with researchers. And if you're interested in learning more about how we use that data, please visit our website. We have a page of project highlights, which goes through exactly how we use this information to help conserve bumblebees. All right, so next we'll talk about how you can sign up for the project. Right. Our goal with the Atlas is really to spread out throughout the region. And so to encourage people to survey in different areas, in rural areas, particularly, we divide each state up into these really big grid cells. Each grid cell is 50 by 50 kilometers. And to sign up for the project, you adopt a grid cell. And what that means is that you are making a pledge to do at least 2 surveys for the Atlas somewhere in that grid cell during our survey season. You may notice from these maps that there are different colored grids. The blue grids are our grids that are high priority. So those are areas where we really want to encourage people to go out and to do a survey because we don't have a lot of data from that area or because there's a species there that we're really excited about. There are also white grid cells, which are low priority grid cells. So these are grid cells where we have more data, but you can still survey them if you would like to. You don't have to survey a high priority grid cell. We just encourage you to do so because that's where the need really is. You may also notice that there are some hatched grid cells there in each state, and those are grids where we have some limitations on the activities that we can do on adoption. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But first off, I want to talk a little bit about our priorities for 2025. So the Iowa Bumblebee Atlas was initiated last year, and we did a great job getting started in 2024. We hit lots of different grid cells across the state, but our goal is to get full coverage of the state. So in some grid cells, we didn't get any surveys, and we really want to focus in on those underrepresented areas. We updated the grid adoption map this year so that any grid cells where we've had at least 3 surveys are no longer considered high priority. So you can use the grid adoption map to help you decide where to survey if you're interested in hitting one of those areas that has been undersurveyed. We want to continue to bring on new participants and spread the word about the Atlas. So if you know somebody who would be interested in participating too, invite them to go out with you on a survey. The more folks, the merrier. We did get a lot of data from the Ames area last year. So if you are based in the Ames area, we really encourage you to go out to a different place if you can. This year, we are going to limit grid adoption to 10 individuals per grid cell in Iowa. There are only a couple grid cells that are going to look like they're going to meet that mark in Iowa, and those are around Ames. So yeah, we really encourage you to get outside of those grid cells that are that have been surveyed a lot. Also, too, I want to mention that if you adopted your grid cell last year, you don't need to re-adopt it this year. You don't need to refill out the form or anything unless you're planning to survey in a different grid cell. All right, in Minnesota, we have similar priorities. We want to collect at least 2 surveys in each grid and 50 bumblebees from each grid cell. The grid adoption map also highlights high priority grids. We really need more data from the northwestern corner of the state. So if you have the capabilities, we really, really encourage you to get out there to those areas that haven't been surveyed yet. There are no limits to grid adoption in Minnesota, so you don't need to worry about that. We just really encourage you to get out to those undersurveyed areas. As I mentioned, there are some limitations in Iowa and Minnesota on the activities that we can do because the rusty patch bumblebee, which is an endangered species, is present in both of these states. To protect the rusty patch bumblebee, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has designated specific areas as what we call high or low potential zones. These are areas where rusty patch bumblebee is most likely to occur. And Netting or handling or catching bumblebees in these areas is not permissible without a permit, without a federal permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So to make sure that we are working within federal regulations, we've set up a tiered system of grid adoption. So what that means is that in grid cells that do not contain any high or low potential zones for rusty patch bumblebee, you don't need to worry. You don't need to do any additional trainings or need to avoid any specific areas in your grid cell. You can just go ahead and adopt that grid cell. You're good to go. In tier 2 grid cells, you will need to do an additional training in order to adopt that grid cell. And you'll also need to make sure that you avoid high or low potential zones within that grid cell. So our tier 2 grid cells, those are categorized by the fact that they do overlap with a rusty patch bumblebee high or low potential zone, but they overlap by less than 50%. There are still areas where you can go out and do surveys using traditional catch and release methods within your grid cell. All right, so the last grid cell tier that we have are the tier 3 grid cells. So these are grid cells where you cannot adopt the grid cell if you plan to do traditional catch and release methods without a permit. And these are grid cells that overlap with high or low potential zones by more than 50%. Even though there are still some areas that aren't covered by high or low potential zones in those grid cells, it's likely that rusty patch bumblebee is present across that entire grid cell, and we really want to make sure that we are avoiding catching these bees. And so for that reason, you either need a permit or you need to plan not to do catch and release surveys if you want to adopt one of those grid cells. So if you are somebody who needs to take that required training, keep an eye out for updates on our newsletters and for links to register. We're going to be holding an online live module for folks at lunchtime on June 5th. That webinar will be recorded, so if you miss it, you can watch the training video to take that training. During that training, we're going to cover how to work within federal protections for this species, how to identify rusty patch bumblebee, and we'll also go over guidance for obtaining permits. After completing this training, you will need to take a short quiz to demonstrate that you understand the federal protections that are in place for this species. All right, there is the possibility that even if you're not in a high or low potential zone, you still might encounter a rusty patch bumblebee. And if that's the case, please let us know. It's super exciting when you find this species outside of those high or low potential zones. Those are brand new locations for that species, and it helps the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service protect those animals in those areas. So if you do spot a bumblebee you think is a rusty patch, please let your coordinator know. If you're in Minnesota, please email Elaine Evans, and if you're in Iowa, please email me and Stephanie. Please try to take a picture of it so that we can confirm it's actually a rusty patch, and then we will contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on your behalf. All right. So even if you're not in a high or low potential zone, you still want to keep your eye out for rusty patch bumblebees. If you see a bumblebee that you think is a rusty patch and you didn't catch it, try not to catch it and just take a photograph of it on the wing. And if you do catch a bumblebee that you think is a rusty patch, even if you're outside of a high or low potential zone, please pause your survey, take a picture of the bee, and then release it as soon as you can. It's not going to hurt the bee to be caught in the net or the vial, but if you hold it for a really long time, that's taking away time that it could be spending foraging. So you want to make sure to release it as soon as you can. All right, so after you have completed all of your required trainings, so if you're in those grid cells that overlap with rusty patch high or low potential zones, that would be completing that third training, or if you've taken both of the online trainings, including this one, the next step is to officially join the project by adopting a grid cell. And so you can do that by going to our website, bumblebeeatlas.org/pages/adopt-a-grid-cell. And I will actually pause my presentation and show you how to do that. live. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Looks good.
Good. Awesome, thank you. All right, so this is our grid adoption page. The first thing that you will see is some information on what to do before you get started. Please make sure you've completed these steps before you sign up for a grid cell. The next step is to decide which grid cell that you would like to adopt. We have a map of all of the grid cells for all of our Atlas projects right below that step. So the first thing you want to do is just zoom into your state that you're interested in. And as you zoom in, you'll be able to view the high and low priority grid cells. You'll also be able to view which grid cells are limited in adoption. So those blue grid cells, those are the high priority grid cells. Those completely transparent grid cells, those are our low priority grid cells. And then those hatched grid cells, those are our grid cells which you can only adopt if you have a permit or you plan to do surveys that do not involve catching or capturing or handling bumblebees. To help you figure out whether or not your grid cell overlaps with a high or low potential zone, we've labeled the names of each grid cell with 2 stars if they overlap with a high or low potential zone at all. You can also see the high or low potential zones. So those yellow blobs there, those are the high or low potential zones. So those are the areas you want to avoid if you're planning to do a catch and release survey. So if you want to zoom in on a particular area, you can type in the address of that specific spot. So say you are based in Ames, Iowa. You can type in the name of the city that you're in, or you can type in your address, and it will automatically zoom in into that area. And from there, you can explore the grid cell that I want to adopt that grid cell, but it's not hatched, so I can still adopt it even if I don't have a permit. You can zoom in and out to explore your grid cell. Say you want to find a particular a survey site. One thing that you can do is turn on the USA Protected Areas Public Access Map. And if I turn that on so that it's visible, I can see public access areas in my state and in my grid cell. And if I zoom in enough and click on the access area that I'm interested in, it will give me the name of the property as well as who manages it. So that's a really nifty tool to use if you are looking for sites in your grid cell. So you don't have to adopt the grid cell that you live in. If you're planning to, say, go on a vacation to Fort Dodge or something like that, you can instead adopt a different grid cell. You're not limited based on where you live. It's really up to you to choose which grid cell you're most interested in. So after you have decided what grid cell you would like to adopt, the next step is to fill out the form underneath. You're just going to fill out all of your information, select the grid cell that you are interested in, and then once you've filled out all of the info, you can just go ahead and hit submit. You'll receive an email after you have completed the process to adopt a grid cell, confirming your adoption has gone through. All right, my slideshow should be back up. Does that look good? One of my panelists.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so once you've decided what grid cell you want to adopt and you fill out the adoption form, the next step is to go out and conduct a survey on your own. So when and where your survey is really up to you. You can do 2 surveys on the same day in different locations, or 2 surveys on different days at the same location, or you can choose different locations and June and September. Our survey window starts June 1st and ends September 30th. So anytime within that survey window is fine. You can do more surveys if you would like to. You're not limited to 2. That's just the minimum that you need to do if you've adopted a grid cell. You don't want to go out when survey conditions aren't optimal for bumblebees. If it's really hot or really cold, or if it's raining outside actively, you're not going to see any bumblebees during your survey. So you want to make sure that you're going out when the temperatures are between 60 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, when wind speeds are below 20 miles per hour, and it's not actively raining. Right, where you survey, also up to you. You can choose any location in your grid cell as long as you make sure you have the appropriate permissions and permits. So that includes private land. You can survey on private land as long as you have permissions. So that could be your own property or property owned by a friend or family member. Just keep in mind that if you do plan to survey on private property, if you're doing a point survey, that area needs to be at least a hectare in size. So even if you have a really lovely pollinator garden full of flowers, that might not be a good place to survey because it needs to be a large area. You can also survey on public lands. Usually when I do an atlas survey, I'm surveying on public lands. So public lands can be owned or managed by the government or organizations like the Nature Conservancy. You often need to apply for a permit to do any sort of surveys on public land. Just a few things to keep in mind while you're surveying. When you're doing surveys, please be sure to make sure to respect private property and ensure that you have permission from the landowner to conduct survey activities. Unless you have explicit permission from a private landowner, make sure you're staying on public lands and right-of-ways. Please note that your grid cell can include both private and public land, and you may not trespass on private land. So when you're at a site, please make sure to look for markers of private land. And if you find yourself on private property without permission or you've been asked to leave, just leave immediately, even if your survey activity is not complete. For your own protection from trespass claims, your permission should be written, even if you're surveying on a friend or family member's land. If you would like to survey at a public place like a city or a county or local park, please make sure to obtain manager permission. Umbrella. If you are based in Iowa, the Iowa Bumblebee Atlas holds a permit to survey Iowa DNR lands. So that includes state parks, state forests, and state preserves that are managed specifically by the Iowa DNR. You can request to be added to our permit by filling out an online form. We'll shoot you an email after this webinar with information about that resource. Permits are required in Minnesota for state recreation areas, state roadsides, state parks, and scientific and natural areas. The Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas project has a permit for specific state parks and scientific and natural areas. So if you're interested in surveying one of those types of properties, please check with us to see if we already have a permit for that. For state forest and wildlife management areas, you don't need a permit, but please make sure to contact the area manager ahead of time before surveying, just to let them know that you're going to be on the property. They could be doing management activities, and it's a good idea always to give the manager a heads up if you're going to be surveying at a site. All right, you can also survey at places like city and counties parks. We don't hold umbrella permits for any city and county park, so make sure to contact the area manager to see if permits are required. For U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service properties, permits are required. We don't hold any umbrella permits for those properties. So if you are interested in surveying one of those lands, please make sure that you would obtain a permit on your own. And then lastly, you can also survey at national parks with a permit. The Xerces Society holds permits at multiple national parks. So if you're interested in a particular national park, please contact us. And just to reiterate, it can be really hard to find a survey site for the very first time. So if you need any help contacting a land manager or figuring out where you want to survey, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to help you figure out where to go to do these surveys. It's literally my job, and I'm always happy to give you a hand with that. All right, so how do you complete a survey? Each survey has two components, the part where you document bumblebees and the part where you document habitat. There are two ways that you can complete that bumblebee survey, doing a point survey or doing a roadside survey. Right, so point surveys are our preferred method for collecting data. So you are going to basically survey a hectare-sized area for bumblebees. You're going to walk really slowly through that entire area, looking for bumblebees and documenting the ones that you see. And you're going to do this for a period of 45 person minutes. So what that means is that we are only counting time that we are actively spending surveying as person minutes. That doesn't count time that you spend logging data or putting bees in vials. It's just the time that you spend surveying. And it also means that you can break up your survey time if you're going out with more people. So if you're going out with 3 different people, you only need to spend 15 person minutes surveying for bumblebees. If you're going out on your own, you'll need to do that entire time period yourself. If you're doing a point survey, it's always a good idea to let somebody know your plan, when and where you're surveying, when you expect to be back home, just because that is always just the safest thing to do. You're going out potentially to a remote location, and it's just a good idea to let somebody know where you'll be. The other style of survey that you can do is a roadside survey. So this is an alternative method for surveying if you're in an area where you just can't find a public property to do a survey, like a state park or natural area. So to do a roadside survey, basically you are just going to make 5 stops along a 10-mile stretch of road. Each one of these stops should be half a mile apart. Basically, you're just going to spend 15 person minutes capturing bumblebees. If you are going to do the roadside survey, once again, make sure that somebody knows your plan. You want to have a friend or a loved one know exactly where you're going to be during your survey. Please make sure to respect property ownership, local regulations, and posted signs. And then if you're doing a roadside survey, make sure to wear bright colors or a safety vest, just so that you're going to be really visible to drivers. So if you are doing a point survey or a roadside survey, our preferred method for you to document bumblebees is to use catch, chill, photograph, and release methods. So when you are using this method, you're going to walk slowly through your survey area, collecting all of the bumblebees that you spot. And you can do that either by netting them or just putting a vial over them and capturing them that way. Your survey should be 45 minutes of active search time. So that is just when you are walking around looking for bees and netting them. It doesn't count time that is spent transferring your bee to a vial, time spent placing your bee in a cooler, or taking any notes. As you collect your bumblebees and place them in a cooler, you're going to want to make sure that you document what flowers they're visiting. You can do that either by writing it down as you collect or by putting a little piece of the flower in your vial with the bee, or writing it on a piece of tape and sticking it to the vial. Now, it's super helpful, I think, to watch a video of somebody catching a bumblebee. We can say, oh, you should go out and net these bumblebees, but it's nice to have a visual for that. So I'm just going to play you all a short video on how to net a bumblebee. Please note that this was recorded for a Bumblebee Atlas project in a different state, but the information is still relevant.
Yep, sounds good.
When you're out collecting your bumblebees, you want to make sure you're doing it carefully, but you also want to make sure you're doing it with a technique where you're actually going to be successful in capturing the bumblebee. Now, the best way to do it is to come from the side. You'll actually sweep over the tops of the flowers, but the most important part is to make sure you follow through and have the net droop over the side of the rim, and you can actually flip it over a third time so the bee can't escape. And another way, you can come from below the bee if the flower's kind of drooping, and you can come up. But again, you have to have that follow through where you flip the net over the top. Another way, if you're feeling a little more timid about sweeping really hard, is bees tend to fly up when they try to escape. So you can actually put the net over the top of the flowers that it's on, and the bee will usually fly up to the top of the net, or once it gets about halfway, you can just tip the net over, and then it'll be captured in the bottom of your net.
All right, thank you for bearing with me. I feel like it's super important for you guys to see how a bee is netted, so thanks for letting me take the time to show you a video about that. We're going to watch another short video on how to move a bee from a net to a vial.
So once you've collected your bee, you're going to gather the net up so that the bee is restricted to one part of the net. And then you're going to take your vial with the lid off, slide it up the net to that area where you've kind of narrowed or bottlenecked the net. You'll slide the bee into the vial and keep that net nice and tight over the top of the vial. Once he's in there, you can take your lid, you can slide it up the net to get to where the top of the vial is. And then you can sometimes keep the net inside the opening and then slide the net out once your lid's on top. Or you can just, if he's cooperating or she's cooperating, you can just slide the lid right over the top, and then you've got your bumblebee. Once you've collected it, you can put it in your cooler or put it on ice, or so you can prepare to process that bee once you're done with your survey.
All right. So once you start trying to catch bees, before you go out and start trying to actually collect bees, it's a good idea to just practice with your net a little bit. Swing your net at a few flowers, get a feel for it. It's really helpful just to learn a little bit about your net before you go out and do a survey. All right, so once you have collected all of your bees, and once you have put them all in a cooler and they have been cold anesthetized, now it's time to photo document them. We will provide detailed guidance during the bee ID section of this presentation on how to photograph bumblebees, but a good rule of thumb is just to take lots of pictures from lots of different angles. You can submit up to 5 photos of each bee that you catch when you submit your data online, so take lots of pictures. It's really important to keep track of your photos as you are photo documenting your bees. As you fill out your data sheet, please make sure to record the number of the photo if you're using a digital camera, or if you're using your phone, you can do things like record the time when you took the photo so that when you go back and look at those files, you can keep straight what bees are associated with which photo. Some volunteers like to put a sticky note with some information about the bee in the frame of the photo. So when they take the picture, information like the date and which bee that is represented are already embedded in the photo, and that's also a really great way to keep track of your photos. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we do have some limitations in certain areas on our ability to use catch, chill, photograph, release methods in HP or bumblebee high and low potential zones, and in those specific grid cells where we have limitations on adoption. You can't collect or handle or touch bumblebees at all, but you can do a photo-only survey. So this is a legitimate way to survey for bumblebees. Similar community science programs in Wisconsin and Illinois only rely on photo-only methods to document bumblebees. However, it's really hard to get good photographs of bumblebees on the wing as they're flying from flower to flower. So we really encourage you to try to find a site where you can do a catch and release survey if you can. However, we do understand that some of you have specific connections with certain places. You know, maybe you own land that you want to survey, or you don't have the ability to travel. So if you are one of those people, this is how you can still participate even if you are in a Rusty Patch High or Low Potential Zone. So to do a photo only survey, you're not going to collect or net or handle bumblebees at all. Basically, you're going to just do the same methods. You're going to walk slowly through your survey area, but instead of catching the bumblebees that you see, you're going to try to take a picture of all the bumblebees you spot. Because you're not netting bumblebees, you aren't going to need to stop your timer for anything except for taking notes. So no matter how you do your bumblebee assessment, you know, whether or not you're using photo-only methods or you are doing a catch and release survey, you're going to pair each one of your surveys of bumblebees with a habitat assessment. These habitat assessments are not meant to be exhaustive. They should only take you 5 to 20 minutes, depending on how complicated of an area you're surveying in, if you're seeing lots of flowers, and how fast you are at filling out your data sheet. But basically, you're just going to assess the habitat around you. What kind of habitat are you in? Are you in a grassland? Are you in a forest? Are you in an agricultural site? What area surrounds your survey area? So that hectare-sized area, what's around you? Are you surrounded by forests? Are you surrounded by more grasslands? You're also going to record how many plant species you encountered that were not visited by bumblebees that are blooming. So what flowers are you seeing that were not visited by bumblebees? And then you're also going to want to record how much of the area is in bloom. You know, what proportion of your hectare-sized site that you were in was fully in bloom? Like where are you seeing flowers? And then you're also going to want to take notes on what management is occurring that you can visually see. So is there evidence that you see of prescription fire or herbicide use, that sort of thing. Before you go out, you're going to want to make sure that you have all of your equipment together. You are going to need to get some stuff before you go out and do your first survey. So you're going to want to make sure that you have your data sheets and a writing utensil. The data sheets are something that you can access online and print them out. We have PDF copies of our data sheets on the Bumblebee Atlas website. You're also want to get a net. We recommend using a mesh aerial insect net. Don't get a canvas one because you won't be able to see through it. You want to get a mesh net. Home Science Tools has a great net for only 20 bucks. Forestry Suppliers also has nets that you can purchase. You're also going to want to get something that you can put bees in, that you can put in a cooler. So I usually like to use plastic vials, 30 to 50 milliliter vials or a centrifuge tube, 5-dram vials, but you can also use household items like old pill bottles or little tiny jelly jars if you'd like. You're also going to want to make sure you have a cooler with ice, a camera. So something with a macro lens is preferred. You can use your smartphone if you would like to. A DSLR camera or a point and shoot camera are great options if you have one of those types of cameras. You're going to want a timer and a way to collect weather information, so that can also be your cell phone. And then it's also really nice to have ID guides and a copy of the handbook. And those materials are also something that you can print off from PDFs that we have online. All right, so we want to help you get a feel for the field methods. It's really hard to learn how to net a bumblebee from just watching videos, although you can do it. It's really nice to just be there with somebody in person learning these techniques. So we're going to be holding some in-person field training events this summer in Iowa and Minnesota. Please check out our events website for more information about these events. We're still in the process of planning our events, so more will be posted as we finalize them. If you do want to come to one of our in-person events, be sure to sign up. We are limited to 20 people per event, so please get your registration form in as soon as you're sure you'll be able to attend. All right, so for the next section of the talk, we'll be talking about how to submit your data to Bumblebee Watch, and I'll hand it off to Katie for that.
All right, data submission. You want to go to the next screen, Jenny?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're brand new to the project, the screenshot that we have on the slide here is an image of Bumblebee Watch, which is the data submission platform that we use to submit all the survey data that you're collecting. It's very similar to iNaturalist or eBird if you use any of those websites where you're submitting survey data and photo observations of bumblebees. And this website is gathering data from both the United States and Canada. There's over 30,000 different participants. We've got almost 150,000 observations at this point. And all of the observations that go into the site are verified by myself and Jenny and Elise and Elaine, everybody on the back end working to make sure that these photos have a species observation and a sex determination possible. Okay, you want to go to the next slide, Jenny? So a few things, we're going to do a walkthrough live of Bumblebee Watch, but before we do that, there's just a few items for you to keep in mind when submitting data. So it's best to submit as close to the survey date as possible, right? So when you're in the field, it's hot, you're having fun, you're catching bumblebees. Sometimes you forget to fill out a section of the data sheet, or maybe you didn't get the wind speed or the temperature. So it's easiest if you can still remember, you know, where you were, what the temperature was, if you can go back and look online to get all those missing pieces. Hopefully you won't have missing pieces, but you know, it happens. So the sooner you enter your data to when you actually collected it, the more accurate you're going to be able to fill in anything that you might have missed in the field. Keep good records of which photographs go with which bee observation. So when you're out and maybe you've caught 20 bumblebees in a day, you're going to have a lot of photographs that look very similar when you get home. So making sure you have a system that is set up to keep track of which bees go with which plant on your data sheet is very helpful. There's quite a few different ways to do this. Some people, if they're using their phone, you know, they might take pictures of a single bee, take a picture of the grass, take pictures of the next bee, take a picture of the grass. And that way you have a visual separation of your bees. Other people will write a number on a vial and they'll include that cap with the number on it in the photo. So each bee has like number 5 next to it. There's many ways to keep track of your bees in your photographs, but make sure you have a system that works for you. And then lastly, when you're going through your photographs at home before you submit them, take some time to go through them and only upload the photos that are most useful. So you might have some that are out of focus. Maybe you have 2 photos that are pretty similar looking. Make sure that you're only uploading the 5 photos that are going to be the best for us to verify that species. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. And we will jump over to Bumblebee Watch. Okay, can everyone see this?
Looks good, Katie.
Okay, perfect. So this is Bumblebee Watch. Again, this is different than the Bumblebee Atlas website. So the Atlas website is where you'll find protocols, data highlights, the adoption map, all of the project specific stuff. Bumblebee Watch is where you submit your data. So you're going to create an account over here in this top corner. Very simple to do. You set up a username, an email address. And when you want to submit data, you can either use this button on the left-hand side, or you can click Add Sightings here. So when we click Add Sightings, if we conducted a survey as part of the Bumblebee Atlas, we're going to click over here under Submit Sightings. This button under Bumblebee Watch you would use if you have an incidental observation. So maybe, you know, you found a bee in your front yard, or while you were walking your dog. You can take photos and still share those, but those are going to go under Bumblebee Watch. So there's no habitat data associated with that. You didn't go out and capture and chill bees. You just sort of took a photo of a bee on a flower. That's where you would use Bumblebee Watch. But if it's survey data, if you're doing it as part of the Minnesota or the Iowa Bumblebee Atlas, you're going to use this Bumblebee Atlas button. And if it's your first time, you won't have anything under your past locations. If you have uploaded data before, you have the option to choose a past site. So if you are surveying somewhere that you have already surveyed in the past, you can click down and find whichever one that survey was. If you're conducting a roadside survey, it's very helpful for us if you can sort of denote which stop it was so that we know we have all 5 of your roadside stops. If you're selecting a new location or somewhere that you haven't surveyed before, you can click this button that says select on map. And then there's a few ways you can go from here. You can either zoom in directly on the map. So let's say I did a survey in Lincoln and it was at Holmes Lake. I can zoom in here. You can switch to satellite to sort of show you what the layout looks like. And I remember my survey wasn't here. So wherever you click on the map, it's going to drop this red point and you can hit set location. When you do that, it will automatically bring in the coordinates for you. Another way you can do this is by typing in the location. So if I type in Holmes Lake, it'll bring me to the broad area, and then I can click the red dot and drag it to wherever I want my survey location to be. You can directly type in the latitude and longitude if you know them, but it is a lot easier to use the map. In my opinion, it makes less room for errors. And then you want to name your site. So this site location is for you. We're not going to use it. This is something that will be able to go into your past location. So if you're going to survey there again, name it something that you'll remember. The accuracy is how close to the survey location you were. So if you know that was your exact spot, I'm going to select 0 to 25. And again, this is helpful, like entering your data as soon as you're able to past your survey site, right? The longer it goes on, you might forget exactly where you surveyed. And if that happens, you're going to want to increase the accuracy. If you think it was in this area, but you don't quite remember, you're going to enter in your date, your survey type, if it was a point or a roadside, collection method. Preferably, we want you to try and capture all the bees that you observed. There might be a location where you get out there and there are just too many bees for you to capture. In that case, you can try and capture the bees that look different to you. Again, that is not our preferred method because that introduces bias, but it happens sometimes. Combination of capturing all and capturing different, maybe you got halfway through your survey and you're like, man, I just can't catch all of these bees. And you switch to only collecting ones that looked different. And then those photo only methods that Jenny described. But again, preferred is to catch everything that you see out there and photograph it. Size of your survey area, number of surveyors for the time. You can sort of click these buttons here. Yes, we'll go back in time so it lets me submit it. There we go. Length, your survey should be 45 minutes total. And this is including all surveyors. So if you went out with 3 people and each of you looked for 15 minutes, that total survey time is still 45 minutes. You're going to type in the temperature and the cloud cover, which is the percent of clouds in the sky that day, wind speed, any weather notes like maybe there was high humidity or there was an oncoming storm or whatever you want to write in there. Air quality, the habitat type of the survey area. So you're going to do your best to describe what the most dominant habitat type was. So let's say we were in a grassland. And then you have options to enter in the surrounding habitat type. So within sight distance from your survey area, as you look around, what other habitat types are you seeing? So I would say riparian, and maybe there was a crop field nearby. I didn't see anything other than that, so I'm going to leave this third habitat type empty. This next question is about the flowering plants percentage. So in your habitat survey area, how much of it was in bloom? How much was available for bumblebees to forage on? I'm going to say mine was about 50%, meaning I could walk around my whole survey area and about half of it had blooming resources. These next checkboxes are related to landscape features that we associate with bumblebee nesting. So as you're walking around looking for bees, keep these items in mind so that when you go to fill out your habitat assessment, you can say, oh yes, I did see some bare soil. I saw some rodent holes. I saw a brush pile. If you didn't see any of these things, there's a button to click none of the above. This next section is related to management practices that might be occurring. So for each of these categories here, you can select, yes, it was occurring. You suspect it was occurring, like maybe you saw evidence of it, or no, it wasn't occurring. So livestock, yes, could be you saw cow pies. Maybe there were no cows, but you saw hoof prints and you saw their poop everywhere. You can click yes. Native grazing, agriculture, herbicide. This one can be a little bit tricky. If you see only a few specific plants, usually it's on thistles I see often. The plant might be yellowish in color, or it's the only dead plant around everything else that's green. You might suspect that there's herbicide use being applied to that plant. Insecticide use, also a tricky one. When it's freshly applied, I feel like sometimes you can smell it in the air if it's abundant or not. But again, just do your best to assess there. Evidence of fire, this can be prescribed fire or a natural wildfire that rolls through. There might be some black soot on the ground still, or as you're walking through some of the plants, maybe the woody stems are brushing up and leaving black streaks around your ankles. A lot of people that know the legacy of the property that they're surveying want to say, yes, there's fire because they know there was a fire, say, last year or so. But with this, we're trying to document what the actual habitat looks like on the day that you surveyed. So even if you know there's been a fire in the past year, but you're not seeing evidence of it, that's how you're going to sort of answer this question. Evidence of honeybees. So if you don't see hives, but maybe you see a huge abundance of honeybees that are foraging in the area, you might suspect that there's a hive nearby. Management notes, you can write down anything there. Again, if you know the legacy of the area, maybe you want to put in when it's burned or when it's grazed or whatever kind of notes would be helpful. Number of flowering species. So again, this is something to sort of keep mental note of as you're going around looking for bumblebees in the area, is how many different plant species are in bloom. And the number that you click here will automatically populate a space for you to enter in the plants. So if I click 13, it's going to give me 13 sections to type in a plant. So let's just do 2 here. And we have incorporated the iNaturalist data set into Bumblebee Watch now. So as you type your plant name, let's say I saw bees on bee balm, and it's going to bring up the different plants for you that might be options. And I know mine was Monarda fistulosa. So I'm going to look through these different species here. It has the common name and the scientific name in italics. And I don't see fistulosa. So I'm going to type in more of the plant name. And as you type, the list will populate. So there's the plant that I want. I'm going to click it and it will enter it in for me. If you don't know what plant you saw, let's say I saw a sunflower, but I have no idea what kind of sunflower it was. Again, you can just type in the common name and scroll through. So here we have the family level, Asteraceae. I know mine was at least in the genus Helianthus. So I'm going to click the genus level because I don't know what species it was, but I know it was a true sunflower. If you couldn't get down to the species level, you could click the family level. That's sort of higher up. It gives you more, I don't want to say flexibility, but it's clearing up any information. Like we don't want to say it was this species when it really wasn't. If we don't even know what the genus was, we're going to click the family level. If it was a volunteer effort, you're going to click volunteer. And then there's a few more options for you to say what time you started your survey, what time you ended, and that includes your driving time, any planning time. how many miles you drove, and then it's going to ask you about how many hours you spent organizing and entering your data. So how much time did you spend looking through your photographs and picking out the good ones? Maybe you cropped some of them. Keep track of all of that and enter that here. So that lets us sort of tally up how much time people are spending on this project. If you use the online resources, it's going to ask you to say yes or no here. And this is separate from any live webinars. So this isn't going to count towards this button, but let's say you look back at this video in July because you wanted to be refreshed on something, you would check this box and enter in the date that you used it and how much time you spent. Again, just a way for us to track how much time people are spending on this area or on this project. This question here, did you detect bees on your survey? So there might be some times where you go out to do a survey and you don't observe any bees, and that data is still very, very important. So if you did not, you're going to click no here, and then all of your habitat data is going to be submitted, right? You won't have to do anything else after that. As soon as you click no, you're good to go. If you did observe bees, you're going to click yes, and we're going to type our name here, and then it's going to bring us to the next page. Oh. Or it's going to say we made a mistake, which is handy. Okay, let's try again. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to add bee photos here. So the first one, I'm going to click add sighting. I'm going to click select photos. I'm going to bring up my photos. We'll go to South Dakota. And I'm going to click a few bees in here. So as it imports these, I have a drop-down list of all the species in the area. If you don't know what bee you have, you can also click the identification tool. And based off of the photos that you have, you can go through this process here of saying, does your bee have yellow hairs on the head or black hairs on the head? Mine has black. Thorax, you sort of look at the different patterns here. Does it have a stripe of black between the wings? Does it have a circle? So if I go up and look, mine has a narrow stripe of black hairs between the wings. And then you can go through the abdomen too, and slowly but surely it narrows down which species you might be looking at. So mine looks most similar to the yellow bumblebee here. So I'm going to click Fervidus and click select species. If you don't know the species, you can certainly just leave it as Bumblebee SP, and one of the experts will come in and verify that for you. The sex, again, you can leave as not determined unless you want to take a guess or state the sex that you know it is. Again, the floral host is connected to iNaturalist, and I saw this bee on tall thistle. I'm going to click that. Any notes you want to put for the floral host, there's any observation notes here. So maybe you saw that this was a queen searching for a nest, which we probably wouldn't come survey time. If you saw bees mating or they were doing something funky out in the field, you're more than welcome to write that down. I'm going to click add sighting, and then it pops up there as pending. If I have another bee to add, I'm going to go to this step again, click add photos, and just keep repeating this until we're all done. And once you're finished uploading your photos, that is all you have to do. There's nothing else for you to click submit, and this checklist will show up on your profile now. So if I go to my profile and scroll down to checklists, it's going to show up right here. And that's all we have. As experts identify your photos, this little pending thing here will either change to verified or in review, and you'll get notifications in Bumblebee Watch and to your email letting you know that your bee status has changed. And I'm going to pass it back to Jenny now.
I think I'm actually just going to pass it to Elaine and Elise, who will be
Okay.
covering, yeah, hot potato. They will be covering photo ID and then photo tips.
Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so thanks for that nice intro to protocols and a review of entering data in Bumblebee Watch. We're going to shift gears here a little bit for our last chunk of time, hopefully save some time to answer some questions live from the Q&A. Elaine and I are going to dip our toes into Bumblebee identification and talk about photo tips. The focus of this sort of Bumblebee ID that we're going to talk through is more about how to recognize the different groups of bumblebees. We categorize them into groups of similar characteristics. And if you can get it down to the group, that will help you know what photos to take that can help us ID the bees on Bumblebee Watch. But before we start talking about bumblebees, I want to talk about just kind of insect ID in general. So my first question here is, which one of these insects is a bee? Some of them are fuzzy, some of them are less fuzzy. And this is actually a trick question because these are all other insects. Most of these are flies. This one here is a wasp. But these are all insects that are sort of mimicking bees. They're fuzzy, they're black and yellow. And this is sort of meant to represent that there are a lot of other insects out there on the landscape that you might encounter during your surveys that are not actually bumblebees. Here is another example of some of these lookalikes. So wasps, flies, moths, again, these are all different insects that have very similar characteristics to bumblebees. The first of these bumblebee lookalikes I'll talk about in a little more detail are flies. There are a lot of flies that are very convincing bumblebee mimics. This one in particular, is very fuzzy. It's got lots of yellow on its thorax. But there are a few characteristics that really differentiate it from a bee. If we look at the head of this fly, that's where we are seeing most of the differences. Most of these flies have really short, sort of stubby antennae, whereas bees have long, elbowed antennae. They have very, very large eyes. If you think of sort of the eyes or the face of a common housefly, those characteristics are seen on these bumblebee lookalike flies as well. These flies also have really short, sort of blunt mouth parts. And then if we look at the rest of their bodies, they only have one pair of wings, where bees have two pairs of wings, and they don't have pollen baskets or pollen collecting structures on their bodies. Another bumblebee lookalike is the clear-winged moth. This is a moth, but it is very fuzzy, similar to the way that a bumblebee is fuzzy. But there are, again, a few key differences. The moths have these very long, curled tongues that they'll use to access nectar from flowers. They also have very long, straight antennae. Bees have elbowed antennae. And then they also don't have a clearly defined waist. So if you think of a bumblebee, they have a clearly defined head, thorax, and abdomen, whereas this moth, doesn't really have those clearly defined body parts. Another lookalike is the large carpenter bees. These are less common in Minnesota, maybe in the southern parts of Minnesota. I imagine they're probably a little bit more common in Iowa, but they are very similar looking to bumblebees. They are large bees that have very robust bodies. And very similarly to bumblebees, they also have yellow hairs on their thoraxes, but their abdomens are shiny. Another key difference is that they have scopa, or these pollen brushes, on their hind legs, rather than a corbicula or pollen basket like the bumblebee, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Male carpenter bees have yellow markings rather than yellow hairs on their faces. And these bees nest in hardwood rather than underground or in large clumps of grass or abandoned rodent dens like bumblebees do. Mining bees, so these are bees in the genus Andrena, can also sometimes look like bumblebees with, they have very fuzzy bodies, again, are often yellow and black. The key differences between the mining bees and the bumblebees are that the mining bees are very, very small. They're a lot smaller than bumblebees. And then again, they have hairy scopa, so those pollen brushes on their hind legs rather than pollen baskets. But let's now shift gears here to talk about the bumblebees. So to break down bumblebee anatomy, there are a few characteristics that we look at when we are trying to identify a bumblebee. So their bodies are broken up into the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The color patterns that we see on the head, thorax, and abdomen are the primary features we're looking at to identify a bumblebee to the species level. Sometimes there are very specific characteristics on the antenna or on the cheek that we look at. And then the hind leg is important when it comes to sexing the bees. So the female bumblebees, other than the female non-parasitic bumblebees, Elaine will talk a little bit about the parasitic or cuckoo bumblebees at the end of this. But the female bumblebees are the ones that have that pollen basket where they're packing pollen in. Males do not have that feature. So getting photos that are showing this hind leg are important. So here's just a different angle of the bumblebee body. This is sort of a top view of the head, thorax, and abdomen. And the bumblebee's abdomen is broken up into these individual little segments that are called tergites or terga. So when we're referring to these, we talk about them as T1, T2, T3, and so on to represent the different abdominal segments of the bumblebee. Here's a zoomed in photo that shows these abdominal segments. T1 is often a little bit smaller than you might imagine, and T2 is sometimes a little bit longer than you might expect. And you can sort of see where the hairs stop on one segment and begin on another segment. So we're really looking to see the different colorations on these different segments because that is a feature that helps us identify a lot of different bumblebee species. So here are a few different examples of how the color patterns might differ between different species. So this bumblebee on the left, we've got just that first abdominal segment here is yellow. The rest of those segments are black. This is also a really great example of a really full pollen basket on the hind leg there. In the middle here, if we're looking again at those abdominal segments, first one is yellow, second segment or T2 sort of has this brown crescent shape to it. And then this bumblebee on the right here, we can see there's two abdominal segments that are all yellow. The cheek, so this is sort of the space between the mouth parts and the eye of the bumblebee. There are a couple species where seeing this size or the length of the cheek is important. So sometimes bumblebees can have short cheeks, sometimes it's more medium, and sometimes it's long. The antennae are sometimes important for species ID as well. So the antennae are also broken up into these individual segments called flagellomeres. We refer to them as F1, F2, F3, and so on. And this is, again, similar to looking at the cheek or the abdominal segments. There are a few species where we need to see the individual length of these segments in order to determine what species we're looking at. Here is a close-up photo of the hind leg of the bumblebee. So this is that corbicula or pollen basket. So this is sort of this flat or shiny area on the hind leg that's surrounded by this fringe of hairs where that bumblebee will pack in the pollen into these really big sort of globs on her hind leg that she will bring back to her nest. So understanding bumblebee anatomy is important when it comes to photo documentation. So there are a few different angles of photos that we ask you to take of all bumblebees that can help us, see these different bumblebee body parts to be able to identify what species of bee we're looking at. The first angle is a photo that shows the face or the head. So sometimes the hairs on the top of the head are important for identifying the species of bumblebee. The length of the cheek can be important as well, and the antennal segments. So trying to get a photo that's in focus of those features is important. Another important angle is the side profile. So that allows us to see sort of what's going on with the hairs on the side of the thorax, as well as what's happening with the color pattern on the abdominal segments. The side profile can also give us a clear shot of the hind leg, so that can help us to sex the bee, so determining if it's male or female. The females have the pollen basket and the males do not. The third important angle is sort of this top-down view, so making sure that the wings of the bee are spread apart. Sometimes when you're going through Bumblebee Watch, you'll see some photos where people have taken like two pencils or something similar to sort of move the wings out of the way of their bee so they can get a clear photo that shows these abdominal segments, because the color pattern that's going on there is super important for identifying bees for species. So there are 3 species in most of the Midwest that account for about 80% of the population. These are the species we refer to as the big 3. So I will talk about these 3 species in a little bit more detail since they are so common, and then I'll hand things off to Elaine to kind of touch base, or we'll talk a little bit about some of those other groups of bumblebees and what to be aware of when it comes to photographing them. So the first of our big 3 species is Bombus impatiens. This is also known as the common eastern bumblebee. The common eastern bumblebee, the thorax is mostly yellow, kind of with this sort of black spot centrally located. On their abdomen, the first abdominal segment, or T1, is yellow, and then the rest of those abdominal segments are black. The males are basically the same as the females, with the same color pattern on the thorax and abdomen, but they have yellow on the front of their faces. So here is an example of a common eastern bumblebee. So we can see here there are lots of yellow hairs on the thorax with this sort of central spot of diffuse black hairs. Then on their abdomen, that first abdominal segment here is yellow, and then the rest of these segments are black. Next bumblebee, again, this is another common eastern bumblebee. We can see again, yellow hairs on the thorax, a little bit of black in the center. That first segment is yellow, and then the rest of those segments are black. This is a great photo because we can clearly tell this is a female bee as well, since she's got lots of pollen loaded up in that pollen basket on her hind leg. Our next bumblebee in the big 3 is Bombus bimaculatus, or the 2-spotted bumblebee. You'll notice that the big 3 bumblebees are fairly similar, with a few key characteristics that differentiate them between each other. You'll see, again, the thorax of the 2-spotted bumblebee is mostly yellow, again, with just this black central spot. And then the abdomen is where we see those key differences. So the first abdominal segment is yellow, but then on the second abdominal segment, we have this sort of W shape, or 2 spots. And then the rest of those abdominal segments are black. Males, again, are very similar to the females, with the same color pattern on the thorax and abdomen, but they have yellow on the front of their faces. Occasionally, males can have this sort of weird tie-dye-like coloration on their abdomens as well. So here's an example of a 2-spotted bumblebee. So we've got yellow on most of the thorax with some black hairs in the center. That first abdominal segment here is yellow, and then we can see these 2 spots, or this little W shape on the second segment. This two spots or the W shape can vary quite a bit from one two-spotted bumblebee to another. Sometimes it's very clearly defined, sometimes it's not so clearly defined. So here's another example of the two-spotted bumblebee. Yellow on the thorax with some black in the center. The first abdominal segment is yellow all the way across, and then we have this W shape. This is a very sort of wide, clearly defined two spots or W shape, and then the rest of these segments here are black. And then just one more example of the two-spotted bumblebee. We can see here, it's a really nice photo that shows sort of these two spots on the abdomen here. And then the third of our big three bumblebee species is Bombus griseocolus, or the brown-belted bumblebee. Again, similar to the two bumblebees we just looked at, the thorax is mostly yellow with this black spot centrally located. Then on our abdomen here, the first abdominal segment is yellow, but the second abdominal segment has this sort of brown, rusty swoosh or crescent shape. And then the rest of those abdominal segments are black. Males are very similar to the females, same color pattern on the thorax and the abdomen. They also have yellow on their faces, and the male brown-belted bumblebees have very, very large eyes. The brown-belted bumblebees can be a little bit tricky sometimes because there can be quite a bit of variation in the size of this brown belt or brown crescent shape. So in this bee on the left here, it's a really clearly defined, very brown in color second abdominal segment. But in this bee on the right here, it's a much more reduced sort of crescent shape that's not as brown in color. So just keep in mind that these can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Here's an example from the side view of a brown-belted bumblebee. So we can see lots of yellow hairs on the thorax. We can tell that there's some black here in the center. This first segment here is yellow. And then we can see sort of the side view of that brown crescent shape. And then the rest of those segments are black. Here is another example sort of from that top-down view of the brown-belted bumblebee, where we've got mostly yellow hairs on the thorax, some black in the center. Then on the abdomen, first abdominal segment is yellow, and then we have this really clearly defined, very nice brown crescent shape of hairs, followed by black on the rest of the abdomen. So the key shots when you're taking your photos of bumblebees that fall into this group of big three are photos that clearly show the first two segments of the abdomen. So this is sort of this top-down view where we can really nicely see that this is a two-spotted bumblebee. We can see that first segment is yellow, and then we've got that W shape on our second segment. And then the second shot that we want to get is the top of the head and the face. So this can help us determine if it's a male versus a female. And then I'm going to pass things off to Elaine to talk about the very yellow bumblebees and some of the other bumblebee groups.
Hello. Let me just get my sharing going here. So yeah, just to emphasize again, this is kind of, getting to know all the different bumblebees. It can be really fun. It can be really challenging. You don't need to worry about it so much as long as you know what photos to take. So yeah, there's lots of resources available if you want to dig more into bumblebee ID, but this is a kind of quick overview to help you take the best photos you can for us to ID. So another group of bees, besides those big three, we have the very yellow bumblebees. So these bees have a lot of yellow on their abdomen. So sections 1 through 4 on the abdomen are completely yellow. There's a black stripe between the wings. And just to get into a little bit of detail with one of the big pairs here are two species, Bombus borealis and Bombus fervidus. And so these have kind of contrasting patterns where Bombus borealis has a lot of dark hairs on the side of its thorax and a lot of yellow hairs on the front. And kind of the opposite where for Fervidus, it's mostly dark hairs on the front and yellow hairs on the side. So the common names for these are the boreal and the golden northern yellow bumblebees. So if you see a bee with just lots of yellow on the abdomen, the important shots to get for those bees are the front of the face. Here it really helps to have a good photo of the side of the thorax, which it does help to have good lighting there. When you're looking for dark hairs on the side of the thorax, it can be hard to know if it's shadow or not. So trying to make sure that there's some light coming down on that area. Also, again, that kind of top side of the thorax and also the tip of the abdomen can help with these. Our next group are a bunch of different species that have a lot of yellow on the first two segments of the abdomen. So there's a whole bunch of different species that fit into this group. Two of the more common ones are the half black and Sanderson's bumblebee, and so they both these are very similar bees that can sometimes end up getting lumped because even by the experts IDing, because it can be hard to tell them apart without the photos that we need. And for this pair, you can see here they're very similar color patterns. With that lots of yellow on the thorax. Sometimes Sanderson's doesn't have quite as much, but the main things we need to do to tell these apart are really detailed. So so for this pair, we actually, for the females, we need to see these really close-up views of the face so we can see this little part that is on their head between their eye and their mandible. And it's one is more long, one is less long. It can be subtle. For the males, we actually need to look at what's happening on segments of the antenna. So there are some differences with hairs that are there and the relative length of these different segments. So that's just to let you know, you don't need to worry about memorizing all this, but that's to let you know that's the level of detail that helps us to get that ID done for those pairs. There's another bee. This is a species that's of conservation concern, Bombus fraternus. They also have a couple of yellow segments. They tend to be much bigger and have more distinct features, but that's another interesting bee that's in that group that we definitely want to keep our eyes out for. So if you do see these bees that have T1 and 2 with that are completely yellow, so not even any black at the sides, we're looking for photos of the top of the thorax. If it's a female, we really could use a close-up that shows that side of the face. And if you can get antennae that are in focus. So a lot of times, sometimes, these species just need to be grouped together. That's okay. We can still learn from them, but it's great if you're able to get those close-up photos. And we have lots of volunteers that have started doing this. It's really exciting to be able to start differentiating these species and learn more about them. Also wanted to talk about the rusty patch bumblebee. So this is a species also of conservation concern. In the protocols, there's limits on where people can survey because of known presence, but there's still lots of places where these bees can show up that we don't know about currently. So every year when we have people out looking, we find new locations for the rusty patch bumblebee. So it's important for everybody to be aware of what these bees look like. They are fortunately pretty distinct. So the for the workers and males, they have this kind of thumbtack of black. Their first two segments are yellow, but then they'll have this patch of rusty color. The queens are actually similar to that last group, T1 and with T1 and 2 yellow. They sometimes will have a rusty patch, but they usually don't. It's usually just yellow on those two segments. But these are really big bees. So the queens are usually able to be told apart partly just from their size. So here's a photo showing that distinctive thumbtack shape or umbrella shape that they have on the thorax. The rusty patch here is really clear and it's really big. It does vary. It's not always quite as clear. So again, queens don't always have that rusty patch. Sometimes there can be a bit of a rusty color there, but they're very large. Their texture on their hair is kind of velvety. It's kind of cropped, and they are really big. So here are some of the different, these are all queens of different species. Oricomis are one of the larger species that we have around, but the Aphanus queens are almost as big as those Oricomis queens. They're really big. Here's a photo showing a queen here from a couple different angles. So you can see that kind of short cropped texture to her hair, really kind of velvety. So this was mentioned, but we do have additional training on rusty patch bumblebees, which is required for some grids, recommended for everybody. This will just give you all a heads up of what to look for, make sure that we're careful when we see these bees. So if you do capture a rusty patch bumblebee, getting a photo that covers those or what you suspect might be a rusty patch bumblebee, getting photos of those first two segments of the abdomen and the thorax, also getting the front of the face and the top of the head are all really helpful photos. Another group are these T1 black bumblebees. So these have mostly black on the thorax behind the wing. T1 is completely black. Then there's a couple segments with yellow and more black. These bees sometimes will have, a couple of these species also have darker wings. So two that are more commonly seen are Pennsylvanicus and Oricomis. This color can be variable, but just so you know, the way we're telling the difference between those, a lot of times if we're able to see the thorax, Pennsylvanicus, the American bumblebee, has kind of a straight line of yellow across T1, whereas on Oricomis, they have the black and gold bumblebee, they have mostly black on T1, and sometimes that black is even going down onto T2. There's also some differences with the color of hairs on the vertex on the very top of the head, whereas which is not to be confused with these hairs that are on the thorax here. We're looking just at the top of the head. And for Pennsylvanicus, they're all black. For Oricomis, they'll have some yellow hairs. A lot of times it's in these two patches. I think of them as really high eyebrows that they have way up tall, way up on the kind of edge of their head there. Their simple eyes, the bumblebees, in addition to their compound eyes on the side, have these three simple eyes on top called ocelli. And for those, on Oricomis, they're kind of lower down on the head, which you can kind of see if you get this kind of particular angle from the top to see where those are. So here's a couple photos where we can see that yellow across here versus the black coming down, as well as black on the top versus here we can see from the side, we can see some yellow hairs there. A third bumblebee that shows up mostly in northern areas. So this is they're rare in southern Minnesota. I doubt that you'll see these in Iowa. Is the yellow-banded bumblebee. They have really similar color patterns, but their special feature is really adorable because they're just really round. So these bumblebees are smaller than those other ones with a similar color pattern. They're really round. They also have this kind of fringe of yellow hairs at the bottom. So if you see these bees with T1 all black, then a bunch of yellow, getting those first two segments of the abdomens really clear will help us see, as well as getting the top of the head and in mind that it helps us to see those ocelli, the simple eyes. I wanted to also mention cuckoo bumblebees. Elise mentioned these briefly. So there are bumblebees that do not collect pollen of their own, so they don't have pollen baskets. They enter the nests of other bumblebees. They usually kill the queen. Some will just sneak around laying their own eggs. They're usually specific to their hosts. Some of them will have a couple of generations per summer, so sometimes we'll see a couple bursts of these coming out. They can be pretty common. Some of the species can be common, especially the males. They can be out and about. One just interesting biology note, it's not just these cuckoo bees that do this. There are other bumblebee species that will just, even though they can make their own nest, they will enter the nest of other bumblebees and take them over. The main thing with these is just going to be recognizing that they are one of these parasitic bees. So the females, they don't have a pollen basket. All of the parasitic bees, both the males and the females, have really thick heads. So this is probably the easiest thing to track on. So their heads are really wide, back that way from the front. Here you can see this is a male lemon cuckoo bumblebee. They have a lot of space there, and this is compared here to a rusty patch bumblebee. You can see it is a much thicker head. For the recognizing them, looking for females that a lot of times the abdomen will be kind of more tapered and curled. A lot of times they'll have more darker hair, sometimes sparser hair on the abdomen. So here's a bee where you can see this kind of narrowed and curled abdomen, the thicker head, and no pollen basket there. The most common one, the one you're most likely to see, is the lemon cuckoo bee, which has a lot of yellow hair on the thorax, mostly black on the abdomen with just some light hairs, mostly on the third abdominal segment. These males are around a lot in the mid to late summer. They have this kind of umbrella-shaped thumbtack here. They have a lot of black hairs between the wing bases, but so some people do confuse these with rusty patch bumblebees, but they don't have the rusty patch. They have a lot more yellow down their abdomen. T1 through 3 are usually yellow. And again, they'll have that thicker head. So here's a picture of a male. One thing to note with the color patterns, sometimes you'll just see what looks like a darker area where it's just thinner hairs and the dark exoskeleton coming through. So this might look like these are kind of darker patches. Those are just kind of thinner hairs and the dark cuticle showing through. So if you see something that you suspect is a cuckoo bumblebee, in addition to the regular photos that you're taking, getting a nice clear photo of the end of the abdomen is really helpful. And if you have males, getting photos of those first 3 antennal segments. Well, a lot of these cuckoo bumblebees are super rare. They're actually our rarest bumblebees that we have in many cases. And so we're really excited to look at photos of these cuckoo bumblebees. One more group, the red bumblebees. So there's all kinds of bumblebees that will have some red coloration on their abdomens. Rufocinctus is one that is a little tricky because sometimes they have red, sometimes they don't. They are the most variable bumblebees that we have around. So all of these different abdomens here are showing patterns for Rufocinctus, for the red-belted bumblebees. Turnarius is a very common one, the tricolored bumblebee. They have really distinct patches of red or orange on the second and third abdominal segments. So here we can see this really, and these are not usually variable. It's usually just yellow, 2 segments of red or orange, yellow, and then black again on their abdomen. So if you do see bees that have any red or orangish hairs on them, the important shots to take for them are those first 2 segments of the abdomen and also the top of the thorax. We do have some other tips there. I wanted to point you to a resource that we put together that kind of summarizes all this. So if you're on the field and you need to remember, what do I do if I see a bee with some red on it? We do have a little one-pager that has those summarized. There's also lots of other photo tips if you go to the Bee Atlas website, just for getting photos that work. Of course, in focus helps. So take a moment to make sure that the photos that you're taking are in focus so we can see the features we need to see here. Sometimes your camera might want to focus on something other than what we need to see, but you can coax it to do what we need. Check on the lighting. This can be tricky to do when you're outdoors, but in general, kind of diffuse lighting is helpful. So if you're out in direct sun, that can a lot of times be too much. You don't want to be in complete shade either, but having mixed light, having indirect light that comes onto the bees can really help to make sure that we can see what we need to see. So again, in addition to too dark, too much light can bleach things out and make it difficult to see. We really need you to try to chill your bees down, take photos of them out of the vial. It may be kind of scary at first, but you'll get used to it. And this is the best way to get clear photos of the bees. When the bees are in the vials, there's just so much to get in the way of seeing what's happening. When you have your vials, make sure that they are sealed before placing them on the ice. They can bees that are get wet. It's a lot harder to see what's going on with the hairs. Oh, I see the the words got mixed up with these slides. So this is the one for not taking the photos of the bees in the vials. This is the one for photographing bees on the back to get a good view of their face. So a lot of times they'll be kind of curled over. If you just flip the bee on its back, that may be, you may be able to get a really nice shot of just the front of view of the face. We also have the grid sheets to help size the bees. Those can be really helpful for us getting the relative sizes of the bees. So thank you very much. Hopefully we have some time here to still answer some questions. Best of luck out there. We're starting to get bees coming out, so we're very excited to start seeing your bees.
And it looks like we have a
Oops.
really great.
You were freezing up again, Jenny.
Oh man. Sorry about that, everybody. We did get some really great questions. There are a few about grid adoption and choosing a survey site that I would like to go over just one more time. We got a few questions about selecting that hectare size survey site. How do you know if it's big enough and that sort of thing? So a hectare you can think of as being about approximately the same size as 2 football fields. You can kind of eyeball it if you're in a big sort of rectangular sized space, but your hectare sized site can be any shape as long as it's continuous. So you can survey a really narrow rectangular sized or rectangular shaped survey area. You can survey in a circular shaped survey area if you're doing a point survey. So one thing that I like to do is to use Google Earth to sort of make a big polygon and measure out about how big that hectare sized is. You can do that until you start to get a feel of what 2 football fields really looks like when you're out surveying. I will also mention for the roadside surveys, you don't need to worry about covering a hectare sized area. That's just for the point style surveys. When you're stopping along the roadsides, you're just making a stop at a patch of flowers and collecting all the bees you see for 15 minutes. You don't need to worry about choosing a hectare sized site if you're doing the roadside surveys. We also got some questions about whether or not you need to readopt your grid cell. So if you adopted a grid cell last year and you plan to survey in that same grid cell, you don't need to readopt it this year. You're good to go. If you would like to survey in a different grid cell, you are going to need to refill out the grid adoption form. And that goes for folks who are surveying in both Iowa and in Minnesota. And just to reiterate, I think it was a little confusing when I went through this the first time during the presentation. There are no limits on the number of people who can adopt a grid cell in Minnesota. In Iowa, we would like to try to limit that to 10. But if you are somebody, who really wants to survey in a grid cell that has more than 10 people who've adopted it, please shoot me an email and we can maybe make an exception for you if you have a particular site that you really want to survey. Once those grid cells are adopted by more than 10 people for Iowa, that option is going to disappear off of the grid adoption form. There are only like 2 grid cells that are even close to being adopted by 10 people at this point, and they're both right outside of Ames. So if you're in Ames, it might be slightly relevant to you, but please email me if you're confused. Super happy to walk you through any step of this process, finding a field site, figuring out the grid adoption map, figuring out whether or not your grid overlaps with rusty patch high or low potential zones. We're here to walk you through every step of this process. We'll be soon sending you an email with all of these list of resources, web links that we've posted in the chat, and next steps. So you'll have our contact information through that. We love to hear from you. So if you're confused about anything, please reach out. Are there any other questions that anyone else wanted to cover that were posted to the Q&A?
I know I see, I think Elise just typed out an answer, but there was a question about, the potential risk to bumblebees with chilling them. And so I thought it might be good to talk about that too. So I've been using that technique with bumblebees for a long time, 20 years, something like that. And so probably have done it with I don't know how many thousands of bees, 10,000 bees, something like that. And it's not 100% risk-free. So there are, it seems like especially on really hot days, some bees will just not react well to being chilled, and when they come out, they can be really slow to recover. It's really just been a handful of times out of those 10,000 bees that a bee has not recovered and has died. So it is a low enough risk that it has not been a concern for the bees. And You know, so the vast majority of the time they're recovering, they're returning immediately. You can see them immediately back out on the flowers where they were.
They're similar to that. There were also a few questions I saw about how long the bees should be on the ice before they're ready to be photographed. So this varies a little bit based on the size of the bee. So some of the bigger bumblebees, like the black and gold bumblebee or the American bumblebee, because they're bigger, they sometimes take a little bit longer be knocked out enough to photograph. But generally, you know, between 5 to 10 minutes on the ice can usually be enough time for them to be knocked out to take photos of. And they're okay in the cooler, you know, for quite a bit of time. But trying to get your bees processed as quickly as possible is generally best practice.
I also wanted to ask a really great question that we got about what if you get stuck at a patch of flowers and you're just collecting all these bees during your 45 minutes and you don't get to walk the entire hectare-sized area of your survey site. And that's a wonderful question. So when you are doing your survey, you want to make sure you balance covering the entire area and also trying to catch lots of bees. So you don't want to get bogged down and just sit at one patch of flowers collecting all the bees, because if you're only collecting bees off of, say, Monarda in this one little patch, you might not be capturing what's going on with the rest of your site, because there could be other flowers blooming somewhere that have different species on them. So what you want to do is just sort of continuously walk through your site. If you get sort of bogged down at a patch, at a certain point, you're just going to have to kind of move past it. You know, walk through your site. You can always return to it if you're not seeing bees at other places. The most important thing is to try to get a representative sample of everything that's going on in that area, as opposed to maximizing the number of bees that you collect. Right. And there will be times like when summer's in full swing, there are going to be a ton of bees in some spots. So you might get right now there aren't too many bees. You probably won't get too bogged down too quickly, but yeah, you can catch quite a few bees during a survey.
Yeah, and someone just asked in the chat, how long do they stay knocked out for? And Stephanie, you can keep typing your answer there, but I was going to add on to that if a bee does start to wake up while you're trying to photograph it, you can just put it back in the vial, put it back on ice, and move on to a different bee and go back to that one when it's chilled. If it does wake up and fly away before you got photographs, well, if that happens, do your best.
For the second part of that same question, will they sting you? That is very unlikely with these protocols. I know Elaine has been doing these type of surveys for a long time and has seen that happen like once. So it is very unlikely. Generally, they kind of just like wake up and fly away.
And just to note that the bigger bees tend to take a little bit longer to cool down. So if you have really big bees, sometimes, you know, I have to leave them in there like 15 minutes, 20 minutes even before they calm down.
You can also mention the survey. So as you sign off here, when you close the Zoom window, a survey is going to pop up. It's pretty short. If you could take a few seconds to fill that out, let us know what you liked about today, what you would like to see in the future. It helps us improve these and really, you know, give you the best information. And there's also a Facebook group of Atlas volunteers. So if you want to get into that group, it's a good spot to connect with volunteers that might be near you. If you want to survey with somebody in the field, you can link up. Lots of people will share photos and talk about identification of both bees and plants, or maybe they're just sharing a cool story from their survey trip. Good place to go if you want to meet up with other volunteers.
All right, and it looks like we got one more question that I don't think we will have time to answer via typing, but regarding grid cell Minnesota 65, which is high priority but remote. If you have any questions about surveying along a hiking trail, please reach out to us. I'm not sure if that would be a good survey site, but I can help you figure that out via email. All right, I think we are all gonna log off at this point. I just want to say thank you all once again for being here with us today. 2 hours on a Saturday is a commitment, and we really appreciate you being here. I'm so excited to meet some of you at our upcoming in-person training events and looking forward to the upcoming field season.